Well, Alex Murdaugh sentenced to life in prison twice for murdering his wife and son. The jury found Murdaugh guilty of the 2021 slayings after deliberating for less than 3 hours. Judge Clifton Newman handed down the punishment earlier in South Carolina's Culleton County Courthouse after Murdaugh maintained his innocence.
And I tell you again, I respect this court, but I'm innocent. I would never, under any circumstances, hurt my wife, Maggie, and I would never, under any circumstances, hurt my son, Paw.
Well, here was Judge Newman's reaction to that.
I would never, under any circumstances, hurt my son, Paw.
Well, and it might not have been you. It might have been the monster you become when you take 15, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 opioid pills. Maybe you become another person.
All right, well, joining me now, criminal defense attorney at Holloway Law Group and true crime podcast host, Phil Holloway. Phil, thank you for joining us. You know, could we just talk a little bit about, double 2 terms consecutively for life in prison behind. South Carolina is not playing around. My concern here is a juror was replaced very late, I believe yesterday, very late in the process. And also the juror we did hear from on camera on GMA this morning said the original round was 9 guilty, 2 not guilty, 1 I don't know. And within 45 minutes, he said they had a unanimous 12 jurors saying guilty. Is that a concern for the prosecution for this win? Is it a full-out win or is it a temporary win?
No, for those reasons, it's a full-out win. Whether or not it comes back on appeal because the judge let in all of this extraneous material, we call it 404B, similar crimes, other crimes evidence, things that they said, related to motive. But in my opinion, they never linked that up really to motive. And honestly, I don't know if the jury believed that that was the motive. But here's the thing. They don't have to believe that's the motive. The prosecutor doesn't have to prove motive. So they could disbelieve all that stuff, and they could have convicted him on the basis of, I think there's 2 key mistakes that the defense made. Number one, they did not address right out of the gate in opening statements that Alex Murdaugh lied to law enforcement. That was a big deal. That put him at the scene of the crime in the very last moments of the lives of his wife and son. And that's something I think that a jury just probably can't get past. The other thing, number 2, I think a big mistake that they made was asking for this jury view. They took the jury to Moselle, to the scene of the crime last week or earlier this week. Well, a few days ago. Anyway, when they got there, what did they see? They saw how close in proximity everything was, and they said, look, wait a minute. He says he was up there when all this gunfire happened. How could he not have heard it? You had not 1, not 2, but like 7 shots, okay? 2 of them from a 12-gauge shotgun and multiple rounds fired from a high-powered rifle. And so their common sense tells them that there's no way that Alex Murdaugh is up in that house at or around the time of the shootings and he didn't hear any of it. So they didn't buy what he was selling. The judge didn't buy what he was selling. And the judge sentenced him accordingly to the 2 consecutive life sentences that you mentioned.
Phil, I'm listening to you and I watched this whole thing and just stunned by the case. It was mesmerizing throughout. And then I watched most of the HBO special. Everything seems to come down to that TikTok video where you actually hear Alex Murdaugh in the area. Without that, everything else is super circumstantial, is it not?
Yes, it is circumstantial. And the thing about circumstantial evidence is it's very powerful when it's used right. It requires a jury to use their imagination a little bit, but to infer from one set of facts that other facts are in existence. And so circumstantial evidence is really powerful, but it's oftentimes the type of evidence that can be viewed a couple of different ways depending on one's perspective. So I think you're right on the mark there. But for that video that with his voice put him at the scene of the crime minutes before they were likely to have been shot, according to the other information that we have, that was devastating. And maybe you could explain that away, but for the fact that you lied about it. Okay. He lied to law enforcement. Right. And it wasn't until the beginning of this trial. And in fact, they mentioned it in opening statements, but they didn't make a big deal about it. It was going to be Alex's voice on that video. They should have come out forcefully and told the jury he lied about it. And then that way it would take the sting out of the prosecutor's case. They wouldn't have spent a day or two having witnesses come in and say, I'm sure that that's his voice. I heard it. I'm 100% positive. They could have dispensed with all that and moved on to some other things that maybe the jury could have sunk their teeth into from the defense perspective.
You know, I think I speak for many, many people. I speak for certainly almost all my friends who've watched this every minute of this trial that we could. Alex Murdaugh taking the stand in his own defense. At first, prior to him taking the stands, I think everyone thought he was shut the door. He's gone for life. He's guilty. Afterwards, I think it may have caused a lot of people to scratch their head and say, well, you want to know something? I still think he's guilty, but I'm not sure it's beyond the reasonable of doubt, which is the standard, which you need to get to. What is your professional opinion? Did he help his case or hurt his case by taking the stand in his own defense?
Well, it's always a lawyer's, it's a Hobson's choice, so to speak, you know, to have your client testify. And at the end of the day, it's their decision. The lawyer cannot directly control that. So I think Alex Murdaugh made the decision that he was going to testify. I doubt his lawyers really wanted him to, but he did it. It was his right.
Was it a mistake?
And, you know, quite frankly, those of us who were on the outside looking in, we saw that. And I said, you know, wait a minute, he didn't do so bad. Maybe he can sell this whole story that, you know, I'm a drug addict, I'm a thief, I'm a liar, but I'm not a killer. Okay, maybe he could have sold that, but those people in the courtroom, not just the jury, but today we found out that the judge was watching him very closely. And those people did not feel that he was being honest. He lost to the jury in the very beginning of the case when they found out he lied about being at the scene of the crime. And because of that mistake, I think that poisoned his opportunity, his chances, if you will, to make that case with the jury later. I think that he lost the jury right out of the gate, and that translates into this 3-hour guilty verdict, which is unheard of. Quite frankly, for a trial that went on 6 weeks.
Yep. And so much at stake. Double murder. Phil Holloway, appreciate your time. I think you're right. I think that juror that we heard from this morning who said, you know, he said he didn't think Alex Murdaugh was crying. It looked like it was fake. He was just blowing snot, and that's his words, not mine. And well, I know some said like a true South Carolinian, and he's probably right. Thank you, Phil. Appreciate your time.
Great to be with you.
All right, folks. Up next.